A billionaire in a wheelchair, a killer who memorized his daughter's school schedule, and a man who spent 6 years trying to forget he was trained to end lives in under 3 seconds. Derek Callahan thought he'd buried that version of himself for good. He was wrong. What started as one quiet Saturday morning at a neighborhood cafe, a stranger in trouble, a split-second decision, would pull him back into a war he never asked for, against an enemy who had been waiting and planning and hating for nearly a decade. This is the story of what happens when a ghost decides to come back. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because stories like this one don't slow down. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Like this video so more people find it. And whatever you do, don't leave. Because once part 1 ends, you won't be able to stop. The cafe on Birchwood Street didn't have a name worth remembering. That was part of why Derek liked it. The sign above the door had been faded since at least 2019, something with the word corner in it, maybe corner brew or corner cup, though half the letters had peeled off and nobody had bothered replacing them. The floor inside was old hardwood that creaked in specific places Derek had memorized without meaning to. Third board from the entrance, 2 steps left of the counter, the spot right beneath the window where the afternoon sun pooled into a flat rectangle of gold. The coffee wasn't exceptional. The muffins came from a grocery store bakery and everyone knew it. The Wi-Fi password was taped to the counter on a piece of masking tape that had been there so long it had turned yellow. Derek Callahan had been coming here every Saturday for 4 years, and in all that time he had never once asked anybody their name. That was also part of why he liked it. He arrived at 9:47 on a Saturday in late October, same as always. Lily's soccer practice ran from 9 to 11, which meant he had exactly 1 hour and 13 minutes of silence before he had to be back at the field. He ordered a black coffee, took the corner table, the one with sight lines to both the entrance and the side hallway, and opened the paperback he'd been working through for the past 3 weeks. A History of the Alaskan Wilderness. He'd read the same page 4 times already because his mind kept drifting, but the book gave his hands something to do. He was 32 years old and looked 40 in certain kinds of light. Not old exactly, but worn, the way a good tool gets worn, the way wood gets worn when it's been out in weather and survived it. His hair was darker than it photographed, cut short out of habit rather than preference. He had a carpenter's hands, broad-palmed and rough at the knuckles, one of them with a faint L-shaped scar that crossed the base of his thumb. He told Lily he got it building a fence. She was 12 and smart enough to have her doubts, but she let it go. She let a lot of things go. She'd learned that from him, which sometimes he thought was not entirely a good thing. He was on his second coffee when the woman came in. She came through the side entrance, the accessible one, with the ramp, and she moved her wheelchair with the practiced efficiency of someone who had long since stopped thinking about it. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray blazer that had probably cost more than Derek's truck. She navigated to the counter without hesitation and ordered something complicated that the teenager behind the register had to ask her to repeat twice. She didn't seem impatient about it. She opened her laptop while she waited, angled slightly away from the room, and started typing. Derek noticed her the way he noticed everyone who came in, filed the information, moved on. He went back to his book. The man came in 11 minutes later. He used the front entrance, and he didn't order anything. He stood just inside the door for a moment, scanning the room, and when he found who he was looking for, something shifted in his face. Not anger. Anger was too clean a word for it. Something older and uglier than anger, the kind of feeling that had been living in a person long enough to leave marks. Derek's eyes came up from the page before he consciously decided to look. The man was maybe 35, thick through the shoulders, with a jaw like a shelf and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow. He was moving toward the woman at the counter now, and the way he moved, deliberately, with the quiet control of someone who had trained his body to be a weapon and never quite untrained it, made the back of Derek's neck go cold. He knew that walk. He had that walk. Former military, Derek thought, close quarters trained, and he's been drinking, not drunk, nothing so obvious. But there was a particular looseness in a trained man's restraint when alcohol had been sitting in him for a few hours. A way the leash on everything he'd been taught slipped just slightly sideways. Derek had seen it enough times to read it from across a room. The man stopped beside the woman's wheelchair and said something low. Derek couldn't hear the words from where he sat, but he watched her shoulders go rigid. She kept her eyes on her laptop screen. "Victoria." The man's voice came up a notch, and now the room could hear it. "I'm talking to you." She closed the laptop, slowly, deliberately, like she was choosing that action instead of letting fear choose it for her. "Logan," she said, "don't do this here." "Don't do what?" He spread his hands, performing reasonableness for an audience that was now trying very hard to look elsewhere. "I just want to talk. We used to talk all the time." "We did. And then I ended things, and you didn't respect that. And now there's a restraining order." Her voice was even, impressively so, Derek thought. The voice of someone who had practiced keeping it that way. "You're violating it right now." "Restraining order." Logan made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Victoria, come on." "Sir." The teenager behind the counter had gone pale. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to—" "Nobody's asking you anything," Logan said, without looking at him. His eyes stayed on Victoria, and what was in them, that bleak consuming thing that had replaced whatever warmth he might once have had, made the teenager take one step backward and reach for his phone. Logan's hand moved faster than Derek expected for a man who'd been drinking. He didn't hit her. He grabbed the laptop off the counter, a quick, contemptuous swipe, and held it at his side like a trophy. "You want this back?" he said. "We're going to have a conversation." That was when Derek put down his book. He didn't rush. He pushed back his chair at a pace that probably looked, to everyone watching, like the pace of a man who wasn't sure what he was walking into. But his heart rate had dropped 3 beats since the moment he stood up, and his eyes had already mapped the room. The placement of the other customers, the location of potential exits, the angle that would put him closest to Logan's right side without breaking the man's line of sight until the last possible moment. 6 years. He had spent 6 years learning not to think this way. The training didn't care. "Hey," Derek said. Logan turned. Up close, he was bigger than he'd looked from across the room, maybe 230, 240, with the dense, compacted muscle of someone who'd spent years doing things that actually required it. He looked at Derek the way men like him always looked at strangers who stepped in uninvited. A quick, automatic assessment, top to bottom, the body language asking the question, "Is this worth my time?" "Walk away," Logan said. "Sure," Derek said. "Just give the lady her laptop first." Silence. A woman at a nearby table had her phone raised in a way that was probably meant to look casual, and didn't. Logan's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're getting into." "Probably not," Derek agreed. "The laptop." Something happened behind Logan's eyes, a decision being made or unmade, and then he moved. It was fast, the kind of fast that surprised people who'd never been in a real fight. He shot his left hand forward in a grab, going for Derek's collar. Derek wasn't there when the hand arrived. He'd slipped left, one step, and he got Logan's extended arm with both hands, controlled, precise, using the man's own momentum, and redirected it. And in the space of about 2 seconds, Logan was facing the counter with his arm bent at an angle that made further movement actively counterproductive. Derek's grip was firm, but not cruel. He was very aware of exactly how much pressure he was applying, and the fact that he could apply 4 times as much without thinking about it. He didn't. "You're going to drop the laptop," Derek said quietly, close to Logan's ear. "And then you're going to leave. Nobody has to make this any bigger than it already is." Logan was breathing hard. His free hand was clenched at his side. For a moment, Derek genuinely didn't know what the man would do, and in that moment, he felt the same thing he'd felt 100 times in 100 different places. That particular stillness that lived just on the other side of violence, where everything balanced on a wire. The laptop hit the counter with a plastic clatter. Derek released him and stepped back. Logan straightened slowly, rolling his shoulder. He turned and looked at Derek, really looked, the way people rarely bother to look at strangers. And something in his expression changed. The rage didn't go away, but something else came into it, something Derek couldn't name. "You should have stayed out of it," Logan said. "Maybe," Derek said. For another second, Logan stood there. Then he walked out the front entrance, and the door swung shut behind him, and the cafe seemed to exhale. The teenager behind the counter said, "Oh my God," in a voice that was mostly breath. Derek turned back to Victoria Hawthorne, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. She'd taken the laptop and placed it in her lap, both hands resting on top of it like she was keeping it anchored, and her dark eyes moved over his face with the particular attention of someone running a very quick, very thorough calculation. "Thank you," she said. "You okay?" "I've been better." A pause. "I've also been worse." He almost smiled at that. "You should call the police. He violated a restraining order in front of a room full of witnesses." "I know." She didn't reach for her phone. "His name is Logan Mercer. It's complicated." "It usually is." She studied him again. "You knew what you were doing," she said. "Not a question." "I used to," Derek said. He went back to his table, picked up his jacket and his paperback, and left enough cash on the table to cover his coffee with tip. He had 17 minutes before he needed to be at Lily's soccer field, and he'd parked 2 blocks east, and there was a good stretch of back road between here and the field where he could drive with the windows down and let his hands stop shaking before his daughter saw him. Because they were shaking. They always did, afterward. People assumed that kind of calm came naturally, that men like him were made of something different, something harder. They weren't. The stillness was trained. The shaking was real. He was halfway to the door when Victoria said, "I don't know your name." He stopped, considered not answering. Then, "Derek." "Victoria." She extended her hand with a formality that was slightly at odds with the situation, but somehow entirely fitting. He crossed back and shook it. Her grip was firm. "Do you live in Millhaven?" "Just outside it. Little place called Garnet. About 20 minutes north." "I'm here for a few months. Project related?" She glanced down at the laptop. "I suppose I'll be seeing a lot of this café." "Good coffee," he said. She looked at her cup. "It really isn't." This time he did smile, brief, involuntary, gone almost before it arrived. "No," he admitted. "It really isn't." He left. Tolted. He was 3 minutes late picking up Lily. She was standing at the edge of the soccer field with her gear bag over one shoulder and grass stains on both knees, and a look on her face that communicated with 12-year-old precision that 3 minutes was absolutely not an acceptable margin. "You're late," she said, climbing into the passenger seat. "Little bit." She buckled her seatbelt and looked at his hands on the wheel. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "Dad?" "I'm fine, Lily." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the October trees moved in a slow wind off the mountains, dropping the last of their color in long drifts across the road. She had her mother's eyes, that particular gray-green that changed with the light, that could look almost blue or almost brown depending on the sky. He couldn't look at them for too long without feeling something shift in his chest that hadn't fully healed and probably never would. "Mrs. Garrett says I might make varsity next year if I keep working on my left foot," Lily said. "Your left foot's getting better." "Still worse than my right." "Your right is excellent. Your left just needs to catch up." That's a very diplomatic answer. "I'm a diplomatic person." She looked at him sideways, and he could see the corner of her mouth pulling toward a smile she hadn't decided to give him yet. "You're really not, though." He couldn't argue with that. They drove through the back roads toward Garnet with the heat up and the radio off. Derek watched the trees and the road and the small distances between things, and he thought about Logan Mercer's face in the moment he'd turned around, that thing in his expression that hadn't been plain anger, that second layer underneath. You should have stayed out of it. The words had a weight to them that simple bravado didn't account for. Men who were just angry didn't speak like that. Men who were carrying something spoke like that, something specific. He pushed it down and concentrated on the road. Yep. The call came that evening. Lily was in her room doing homework, or doing something adjacent to homework, given the amount of music he could hear through the door. Derek was in the kitchen assembling a very mediocre pot of chili that was mostly going to work as tomorrow's lunch, and his phone buzzed on the counter with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. "Hello." Static, then, "You made a mistake today, Derek." His hand tightened on the phone. He kept his voice level. "Who is this?" "You know who this is." He did. He recognized the voice, Logan Mercer's voice, but stripped of the performance now without the audience. Flat and deliberate, each word placed with care. How did you get this number? Lily had soccer practice this morning. St. Catherine's Field, 9 to 11. She takes the number 7 bus on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She eats lunch at the cafeteria table nearest the window in her school's east wing. A pause. She's got good instincts for her left foot. Still weaker than her right, but she's working on it. The chili pot went blurry at the edges. Derek walked to the window. The backyard was dark, the tree line at the far edge a solid black wall against a sky that was going from purple to nothing. He scanned it without thinking about why. You come near my daughter, he said, and we'll have a different kind of conversation than the one we had today. No threats? Logan's voice stayed flat. Just information. I want you to understand what I know, and what I know is everything. Where you live, where she goes to school, what time you pick her up, all of it. Another pause. You should have stayed in whatever quiet little life you crawled into. You didn't. So now we finish something that should have ended 9 years ago. The line went dead. Derek stood at the window for a long time. From upstairs, through the door, through the music, the sound of his daughter laughing at something on her phone. Light, easy, the laugh of a 12-year-old who still believed the world beyond her father's house was mostly safe. He kept his eyes on the dark tree line. He thought about the walk Logan Mercer had when he came through that cafe door, that particular purposeful walk that had lived in Derek's memory for 6 years, worn into the muscle from thousands of miles of operational terrain. The walk of someone who had been trained to complete an objective at any cost. 9 years ago. Derek searched his memory the way you search an old house you know too well, systematically, room by room, knowing the layout even when the lights are off. 9 years ago. He'd been 23. He'd been a different version of a person that he had worked very hard to stop being. He found it. And the cold that moved through him wasn't the October air. He pulled the blinds closed, checked the locks on the back door, stood in the kitchen for another minute, listening to the sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of Lily's chair upstairs, the music from her phone, and held on to all of it very carefully, the way you hold something you know is fragile and haven't figured out how to protect yet. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't dialed in 3 years. It rang twice. "Brooks?" said a voice on the other end. Gruff, efficient, the voice of a man who answered the phone the same way at 11 p.m. as he did at noon. "Ethan," Derek said, "it's Callahan. I need to talk to you." A beat of silence. "Where are you?" "Home. Garnet." "Give me an hour." The line clicked off. Derek went to the base of the stairs and listened. Lily's music had changed to something slower, something that meant she was probably actually doing homework now, or at least thinking about it. He stood there with one hand on the banister, looking up at the strip of light under her door, and the thing in his chest that had been carefully, persistently sealed for 6 years developed a crack so small it was barely anything. Barely. He went back to the kitchen, turned off the chili, sat down at the table in the quiet, and waited for Brooks to arrive, with the blinds closed against the dark outside, watching his hands on the table and waiting for them to stop. They didn't stop for a long time. Ethan Brooks arrived at 10:43 p.m. in an unmarked apartment car that still had a police radio antenna and fooled exactly nobody. He was 51 years old, built like a man who had once been in very good shape and had since made a reasonable peace with the fact that those days were behind him. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans and carried a paper cup of gas station coffee that he didn't offer to share, which Derek respected. He came through the front door without knocking. Derek had left it unlocked, and stood in the kitchen doorway, taking in the room the way cops do, that habitual cataloging that never fully switches off even at 11 o'clock on a Saturday. "You look like hell," Brooks said. "Sit down, Ethan." Brooks sat. He put the coffee on the table and looked at Derek across it with the particular patience of a man who had learned over many years of this kind of conversation that rushing never got you there faster. Derek told him about the cafe. He told him about Logan Mercer, about the restraining order Victoria had mentioned, about the confrontation and how it ended. Then he told him about the phone call. Brooks didn't interrupt. He held his coffee with both hands and listened, and when Derek finished, he was quiet for a moment, turning something over. He knew Lily's schedule, Brooks said, down to the bus routes. How long do you think he's been watching? Long enough. Derek's jaw tightened. He said 9 years ago. He said we need to finish something. I know what he's talking about. Brooks looked up. Operation Halcyon, Derek said. June, 9 years back. Classified. I can't give you the details and you can't use them anyway. But there was a man named Carter Mercer. He was... Derek stopped, chose the next words carefully. He made a choice that put the whole team in the kill zone. I made a call. He didn't come home. The refrigerator hummed. Upstairs, Lily's music had gone quiet, which meant she'd fallen asleep at her desk, probably with her homework half finished and her phone in her hand. She did that on Saturdays when practice wore her out. Logan Mercer, Brooks said slowly. Carter's brother. Has to be. And he blames you. He blames me. Brooks turned his coffee cup in a slow circle on the table. Derek, I need you to understand what I can and can't do here. If he violated the restraining order, that's actionable, but it's her restraining order and she'd need to file the complaint. The phone call is harder. Anonymous, no recording, your word against his. I know. I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm saying what I can move on. I know, Ethan. Derek looked at the table. I'm not calling you for a warrant. I'm calling you because I need someone else to know this is happening. In case... He didn't finish that sentence. Brooks understood it anyway. I'll start a file. Quietly. And I'll have a patrol car swing past the house a couple times a night. It won't be much. It's something. Brooks left at midnight, taking his gas station coffee and leaving behind a silence that felt larger than the one before he'd arrived. Derek checked the locks again. Front door, back door, the window above the kitchen sink that had a latch that didn't fully catch, which he'd been meaning to fix for 2 months, and now fixed at midnight with a screwdriver and a piece of hardware he found in the utility drawer. He didn't sleep much. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house, and sometimes a car would pass on the road outside, and he would track it by sound until it was gone. At 6 in the morning, he got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything he remembered about Carter Mercer, about Halcyon, about what Logan might know, and what he might not. He wrote it in a shorthand that nobody else would be able to read, and then he folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket. And when Lily came downstairs at 7:30 in her soccer socks and an oversized sweatshirt, looking half asleep and mildly suspicious that he was already dressed and caffeinated, he told her it was going to be a good Sunday and asked if she wanted pancakes. You're being weird, she said. I'm always weird. You're being a different kind of weird. He put the pan on the stove. Blueberry or plain? She looked at him for another second with those gray-green eyes that saw too much, then pulled out a stool and sat at the counter. Blueberry, she said, and you have to use the real maple syrup, not the fake kind. The real kind is $9. It's better. It's $9. Dad, he got out the real maple syrup. He went back to the cafe on Wednesday. He hadn't planned to. He had a job site in Millhaven, a deck extension for a family on Roper Street that needed to be wrapped before the ground froze. And the lumber yard he used was 2 blocks from Birchwood Street, so it was a reasonable detour. That was what he told himself anyway. Victoria was there, at the same table by the window, with her laptop open and a tea instead of coffee this time. She looked up when he came in, and something crossed her face. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration, the expression of someone who'd been thinking about a thing, and now that thing had walked through the door. Carpenter, she said. That's not my name. It is today. She gestured at the sawdust on his jacket, which he hadn't noticed. Sit down if you want. You don't have to. He ordered a coffee and sat across from her, not because he'd planned to, but because the alternative was standing there looking like he'd wandered in by accident, which was worse. You filed the police report? He asked. I did. She turned her teacup. Lieutenant Brooks was very thorough, very professional. He explained to me with great patience exactly why Logan probably wouldn't face any immediate consequences for what happened Saturday. He's good at explaining that. Apparently Logan's already told his version of events to someone in the department, claimed he came in to return a scarf he said I'd left at his place, that I provoked the confrontation, that you assaulted him. She said all of this with a levelness that Derek recognized as the product of effort, not temperament. He's very good at appearing reasonable when it matters. Yeah, Derek said. I noticed. She looked at him. How did you do that? On Saturday? The way you moved? Old habit. Military? He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Used to be. She seemed to understand that was as far as that topic went because she shifted, pulling her laptop slightly to one side like she was clearing space between them for something else. I grew up in New Hampshire, she said. Nashua. Which you probably don't care about, but I'm telling you because you have the look of someone who's wondering why a person with my particular resources is spending 3 months in a town like Millhaven, drinking bad coffee. I wasn't going to ask, but you wondered. He had. Accessible playground project, he said, because she'd mentioned it to Brooks, and Brooks had mentioned it to him in passing. Something about community infrastructure. She seemed mildly surprised that he knew. Among other things, I started a nonprofit 3 years ago, Groundwork Initiative. We fund and design accessible public spaces in underserved communities. Millhaven's been on our list for 2 years. The town has one public park. It has exactly one accessible feature, a paved path that ends about 30 feet in and then just becomes grass. She paused. I wanted to oversee this one personally. Because of Nashua. She glanced at him. Because of Nashua, she confirmed. I grew up near a park that I could get to the edge of. That was it, the edge. She closed the laptop gently. Anyway, that's why I'm here. Derek drank his coffee. It was still not very good. The ramp, he said. The one on the side entrance. It's got a crack running through the third board. She blinked. I noticed it was getting worse. It'll fail before spring if nobody fixes it. The anchoring hardware's also loose. You can feel it give when any real weight comes down on it. He set down his mug. I could look at it. If you want. Wouldn't take long. Victoria studied him with that calculating attention he was starting to recognize as just how she looked at things. Not suspicious, not unfriendly, just precise. Why? He thought about it. Because it's a bad ramp and I can fix it, he said. That's the whole reason. She held his gaze for a moment, then, all right, Carpenter. He came back the next morning with his tools. The ramp took him most of Thursday morning. It was worse than he'd thought. Not just the cracked board, but the entire mounting structure had been installed wrong to begin with, set at an angle that accumulated water at the base and had been slowly rotting the lower supports from the inside. He had to pull half of it apart to fix it properly, which meant the cafe's side entrance was blocked for 2 hours, and the owner, a compact man named Paul, who wore the same apron every day and had the resigned energy of someone who had seen everything, stood in the doorway watching and periodically offering opinions that Derek politely did not take. Victoria worked at her window table throughout, occasionally rolling over to observe his progress, and once bringing him a coffee he hadn't asked for, which he drank while crouched beside the new mounting brackets because there was nowhere to set it down. You're rebuilding the whole thing, she said. The whole thing needed rebuilding. I thought you were just going to replace the board. I was going to replace the board, and then I looked at the base. He tightened a bolt. You can fix the visible thing, or you can fix the actual problem. They're not always the same repair. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how long have you been a carpenter? 6 years, give or take. And before that, he said, I did something else. She didn't push. He was starting to appreciate that about her. She had a fine sense for where the doors were in a conversation, and she didn't lean on the ones that were closed. He finished the ramp by noon. It was solid, better than new, because new had been wrong. He walked up and down it twice to test it, pressed on the railings, checked the drainage angle. Then he packed his tools. What do I owe you? Victoria asked. Nothing. Materials were maybe $40. I had most of it in the truck. Derek, it's $40 of wood, Victoria. Don't make it a thing. She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between exasperated and something warmer and said, You're very strange. People keep telling me that this week. He drove to the lumberyard, picked up the order for the Roper Street job, and spent the afternoon working in the cold with his jacket off because the work kept him warm enough and the cold kept him sharp. And he thought about the ramp and the base that had been wrong from the beginning, and he didn't let himself think about much else. He was home by 5, and the message was waiting on his phone. Not a call this time. A text from a number that wasn't in his contacts. A number that when he searched it came back to nothing. A burner, almost certainly. The text was 6 words. Nice work on the ramp today. Derek stood in his driveway with his phone in his hand and the cold coming off the mountains at his back, and he looked at those 6 words for a long time. Logan Mercer had been at the café, or near enough to see. He called Brooks. "I know," Brooks said before Derek finished explaining. "We got a call from the cafe owner about a man sitting in a car across the street for most of Thursday morning. Dark blue sedan, partial plate, no parking violation, so the patrol officer that drove past didn't have grounds to stop." A pause. "Derek, he's being careful." "He's not being careful. He wants me to know he was there." Which amounts to the same problem. I can't act on a text from a burner phone. He was within 100 yards of the restraining order location. Victoria would need to certify, "I know." Derek pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. "Ethan, he's escalating." Or he's trying to make you feel like he's escalating, which achieves the same thing without him having to do anything actionable. Brooks sounded tired in the specific way of someone who understood the gap between what was happening and what the law could address, and lived in that gap every day. "I'm putting extra patrol on Birchwood Street, and I'm going to have someone keep eyes on your road at night. That's what I've got right now." Derek thanked him and hung up and stood in the driveway until the cold worked its way through his jacket and he had to go inside. He didn't tell Lily about the text. He made dinner, pasta, which he was better at than chili, though not by much, and they ate and she talked about a history project she was doing on the railroad expansion of the 1860s, and he listened and asked questions and kept his phone face down on the counter and didn't check it again until she went to bed. He told himself it was fine, but checked. The following Saturday, he went back to the cafe, and this time Victoria was already outside when he arrived, parked at the bottom of the new ramp, looking up at it with her head tilted slightly to one side. "It doesn't flex anymore," she said when he stopped beside her. "It shouldn't flex. The old one flexed every time I came down it. I'd gotten so used to it I stopped noticing." She ran her hand along the new railing, that same precise tactile attention she gave to everything. "Thank you. Really." He looked at the ramp instead of at her. "Has Mercer come back?" "Not in person. He's been—" She paused. "Calling, from different numbers. I've been documenting everything for Brooks." "What does he say?" "That he loves me. That I misunderstood things. That I ruined his life." She said this with a flatness that didn't fool him. Not calm, just controlled. The tone of someone who had read those words enough times to sandpaper them down to something she could hold without bleeding. "He's been with 3 different therapists in 2 years. I know because he tells me. He says it so I'll feel sorry for him." "Do you?" She considered this with an honesty that surprised him. "Sometimes, for about 30 seconds, and then I remember what it was actually like, and the 30 seconds passes." They went inside and got their respective bad drinks and sat at her table, and Derek noticed that when she talked about her work, the playground project, the funding structures, the particular hell of municipal permitting, she became a different kind of person than the one who talked about Logan Mercer. Not happier exactly, but more fully herself, the way some people only really exist inside the thing they've built their life around. "The park design," she said, pulling up something on her laptop and turning it toward him. "This is the current draft. The equipment supplier we were working with pulled out last month, contract dispute with the town. So we're back to ground level on fabrication." He looked at the plans. They were more complex than he'd expected. Not just ramps and smooth surfaces, but actual architectural thought. The playground integrated rather than accommodated. Accessibility built in from the beginning rather than bolted on as an afterthought. "Who designed this?" he asked. "I did. With a firm in Boston. Mostly I did." She said it without apology, without false modesty. She'd done it. It was good work. That was the fact of it. Derek traced the line of one of the structures with his finger, not quite touching the screen. Some of this could be built locally. The wooden elements, the climbing structures, the boundary framing. You'd need a fabricator who understood the load tolerances and the ADA requirements, but it's not. It's good design. It's buildable. Victoria looked at him. He looked back. I'm a carpenter, he said. I know what you are, she said. And for a moment neither of them said anything else, and the cafe went on around them with its creaking floor and its bad coffee and its one ceiling light that flickered slightly when a truck went by on the street outside. And Derek thought about a ramp that had been wrong from the foundation up, and what it meant to fix the actual problem instead of just the visible thing. Then his phone buzzed on the table. He flipped it over. A photo. His driveway. His truck. Lily's jacket hanging on the porch railing where she'd left it when she came home from school Friday. The yellow one with the patch on the left sleeve that she'd sewn on herself. A small embroidered sun, because she'd been going through a crafting phase in the spring, and the jacket had seemed like a good canvas. The jacket was unmistakable. Below the photo, one line of text. Yellow's a nice color, easy to spot in a crowd. Derek's hand closed around the phone. Across the table, Victoria watched his face change, and she didn't ask what it was because she could already see that whatever it was bad. And whatever was between them, this uncertain, unasked-for thing that had been building across 4 cups of bad coffee and 1 rebuilt ramp, went very quiet under the weight of what was sitting in Derek Callahan's hand. He stood up. I have to make a call. Derek. He was already at the door. He stepped outside into the October cold, and for a moment he just stood on the new ramp he'd built, on the solid wood that didn't flex, with his phone in his fist and the photo of his daughter's jacket on the screen. Then he called Lily's cell. It rang twice. 3 times. 4. The cold pressed in from every direction, and the street was empty and quiet, and Derek stood very still the way he went still when things got dangerous. Not calm, never calm, but focused, narrowed down to the next necessary action, and nothing else. She picked up on the 5th ring. Dad, where are you right now? His voice was even. He'd worked very hard for 6 years to make his voice even in moments like this. I'm at Emma's. We're doing the history project. You knew that. Stay inside. Don't go outside for any reason. I'm coming to get you. Dad, what's going on? Lily. He made himself slow down. You're not in any trouble? I just need you to stay inside with Emma until I get there. Okay? Can you do that? A pause. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, and he hated that she could hear something in his tone that 12-year-olds shouldn't have to learn to hear. Okay, she said. Yeah. I'll stay inside. Good girl. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He went back into the cafe. Victoria was watching the door. He moved to the table, picked up his jacket, and looked at her. He sent me a photo of my house, he said. My daughter's jacket. Her face did not change dramatically. It just went still, the same way his had. And he understood in that moment that she was not a stranger to this particular kind of fear. The fear that moves slowly, that announces itself in small gestures and photographs and 6-word text messages, that is designed above all else to make you understand that you are not safe and that there is nothing you can do about it. Go get her, Victoria said. I'll call Brooks from the car. He hesitated. It was a short hesitation, a fraction of a second, the kind that most people wouldn't notice. Lock up when you leave. Don't go anywhere alone tonight. Derek? She met his eyes. I know how to do this part. I've been doing it longer than you have. He believed her. It didn't make leaving easier. He went out to his truck and drove to Emma Kasparian's house on the other side of Millhaven, doing exactly 4 miles over the speed limit, because going faster would have felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to admit. He called Brooks, who answered on the 2nd ring and listened and said the word damn very quietly, and then started talking about what could actually be done, which wasn't much, but was something. Lily was at Emma's front window when he pulled up, watching for the truck. She was in her yellow jacket. She must have grabbed it on the way out the door this morning, and the small embroidered sun on the sleeve caught the late afternoon light. She came out to the truck before he reached the porch, which meant she'd been worried enough not to wait. Tell me what's happening, she said. Not a question. She stood in front of him on the front walk with her gear bag over her shoulder and her chin up, 12 years old and already learning that the things adults tried to protect you from had a way of finding you anyway. Derek looked at her. He thought about what to say and what not to say, and how thin the line between those two things was when the person asking trusted you completely. Someone is trying to scare me, he said. They sent me a photo of the house. I don't think you're in immediate danger, but I didn't like the photo and I'd rather have you with me than wonder. She chewed on that for a second. Someone from before. He didn't answer. From when you were in the military, she said. Still, he didn't answer, and his silence was the answer, and she nodded slowly, not accepting it so much as filing it, storing it in the same drawer where she kept all the other things about her father that didn't fully add up, and that she was smart enough to know she didn't yet have all the pieces to. Okay, she said. Can I still turn in the history project on Monday? Something in his chest loosened by about half a degree. Yeah, he said. You can still turn in the project. Then let's go. She walked past him to the truck and climbed in, and he followed, and they drove home through the fading afternoon with the heater on and the radio off, and he watched the rearview mirror more carefully than he should have had to. At home, he checked every room before he let her go upstairs. He did it in a way he hoped looked casual. He was fairly sure it didn't. He replaced the window latch in Lily's bedroom that he'd also been meaning to fix for months. She watched him do it without comment, which was its own kind of comment. That night, after she was asleep, Derek sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad again. He wrote down what Logan had done and when. The phone call. The text. The photograph. The sighting at the café. He wrote it in a column, clean and sequential, and then he sat back and looked at it. Logan Mercer was not escalating randomly. He was escalating deliberately, each step slightly beyond the last, each one deniable in isolation, each one designed to make Derek react, to make him do something that could be framed as aggression, as instability, to make him look like the threat. He's trying to make me throw the first real punch, Derek thought, so that when the actual play comes, I look like the one who started it. He sat with that for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and sent a text to Victoria. Keep documenting everything. Date, time, content. Send copies to Brooks and keep originals. He thought for a moment and added, don't minimize anything to seem more manageable. Report exactly what it is. Her reply came back 3 minutes later. Already doing all of that. Get some sleep, Derek. He almost smiled. He didn't sleep much, but he kept the lights off and stayed at the kitchen table and watched the driveway through the window and thought about the difference between a man who wanted revenge and a man who had been planning it for 9 years. Because that was the thing about Logan Mercer that was still keeping Derek awake at 1 a.m. while his daughter slept above him. Random hatred was manageable. Rage that burned itself out in confrontations and phone calls and photographs, that was manageable. You could anticipate it, work around it, contain it. But 9 years was not rage. 9 years was architecture. And Derek had seen enough of what patient men could build to know that whatever Logan had constructed in 9 years of planning, they hadn't seen the foundation of it yet. The photograph of Lily's jacket sat in Derek's phone like a splinter he couldn't get to. He looked at it one more time the following morning, in the gray early light before the house was awake, and then he deleted it. Not because he wanted to erase it, but because having it in his pocket where he might look at it again was doing something to the way he thought, and he needed to think clearly. He'd already sent a copy to Brooks. The evidence was preserved. He didn't need to keep the original close to him like a wound he kept reopening to make sure it was still there. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the driveway and the road beyond it and the tree line beyond that, and nothing moved except a neighbor's cat picking its way across the frost-hardened yard next door. He had decisions to make. He'd known that since Saturday, since the photo, since the moment he'd stood on the new ramp outside the cafe and felt the ground shift under a situation he'd been hoping was still manageable. The problem was that the decisions all had costs, and every cost involved either Lily or his own sense of what kind of man he'd spent 6 years trying to become. Lily came downstairs at 7:15, saw his face, and said nothing about it. She made her own toast, which she burned slightly and ate anyway, and told him she needed new cleats before the season ended because the left one had developed a squeak that was embarrassing. He told her they'd go on Tuesday. She said, okay. She was being careful with him in the way she'd learned to be careful when she could tell something was sitting on him that he wasn't ready to put down. Not tiptoeing, not afraid of him, just giving him room. She'd learned that from watching him give her room when she needed it. He hated that she had to know how to do that. After she left for school, he called his sister in Vermont. Carol was 41, practical in the way of people who had grown up watching their parents cope with hard things, and had decided that practicality was the most honest form of love available. She and Derek had never been close in the easy, demonstrative way some siblings were, but they were close in the way that mattered, which was that when he called, she picked up, and when he talked, she listened without filling every pause with something reassuring. He told her what was happening. Not all of it. Not Halcyon, not Carter Mercer, not the classified geography of what had led to this moment. Just the shape of it. A man with a grievance, escalating behavior. Lily's routine compromised. "You want me to take her," Carol said. "For a while. A week or two. I don't know yet." "She's not going to like it." "No." "Are you going to tell her why?" "Enough of it." Carol was quiet for a moment. He could hear her moving around her kitchen, the particular sound of her morning routine. "Derek," she said, "are you okay?" "I'm handling it." "That's not what I asked." He leaned against the counter. Outside, the cat had moved on and the yard was empty. "No," he said, "not entirely." "Okay," she said simply. "Tell me when. I'll come get her or you can drive her up. Whatever works." He thanked her and hung up. He stood in the kitchen and thought about how to tell Lily and whether there was a version of this conversation that didn't feel like failure, and concluded that there wasn't and that he'd have to do it anyway. He went to the job site. He worked until 3, then drove to the school, then took Lily for the new cleats she needed, and over dinner that night he told her she was going to stay with Aunt Carol for a couple of weeks. The silence that followed was the specific kind that had texture to it. "Because of the man," Lily said. "Yeah." She pushed her fork across her plate. "Is he going to come here?" "I don't know. I don't think so. But I don't know, and you'd rather I wasn't here if he does." "I'd rather you were safe, and I can be more useful if I'm not spending half my concentration worrying about you." She looked up. "That's honest, at least." "I try." "How long is a couple of weeks?" "I don't know yet." She was quiet. He watched her work through it. The frustration, the fear she was trying not to show him because she'd inherited his instinct to not show the things that could be used against you, which was a useful instinct and a terrible thing to pass on to your child. "Will you call me every day?" she asked. "Every day. Twice if you want." "Once is fine. Twice would be weird." She picked up her fork again. "Carol's got that terrible guest bed. It's not that bad. It's like sleeping on plywood. I'll tell her to get a foam topper. You won't remember to tell her. I'll text her right now." He picked up his phone and texted Carol. "Get a foam topper for the guest bed. Lily says it's like plywood." Carol texted back a thumbs up emoji, and then, after a second emoji of a woman shrugging. He showed Lily the screen. She almost laughed. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was close enough that the weight in his chest lifted fractionally. "Okay," she said, "but I'm bringing my own pillow." "You can bring both pillows." "That's excessive." "Lily, bring both pillows." She brought both pillows. Carol came on Thursday, and Derek watched his daughter load her bag into the back of Carol's Subaru, and Lily hugged him in the driveway with her face pressed briefly against his jacket, the way she hadn't done since she was small. And then she pulled back and looked at him with those eyes and said, "Don't do anything stupid." "Define stupid." "Dad, I know what stupid is," he said. "I won't." She gave him the look that said she wasn't entirely convinced but had decided to extend conditional trust, which, he reflected, was probably the most he deserved. He stood in the driveway and watched Carol's Subaru until it turned at the end of the road, and then he stood there for a little while longer in the cold, in the quiet, in the space that had just gotten significantly larger. He went to see Victoria that afternoon. He found her at the project office she'd rented on Clement Street, a former insurance company, still smelling faintly of industrial carpet cleaner, with plans spread across 2 folding tables and a woman Derek hadn't met before typing at a laptop in the corner. Victoria introduced her as Diane, her project coordinator, and Diane gave him a brief assessing look before going back to her screen. "Lily?" Victoria asked. "With my sister, Vermont." She nodded. She didn't say good, or that must have been hard, or any of the things people said when they were trying to fill the shape of someone else's grief with words. She just moved to the side and made room for him at the table where the plans were spread. "The lumber estimate," she said, "for the wooden structures. I pulled it together after you mentioned it." She slid a sheet toward him. He looked at it. The numbers were off in a few places. She'd priced hardwood where exterior-grade pine would hold up better and cost considerably less, and the fastener budget was too low by about 30%. He told her so. "Show me," she said. He picked up a pencil, an actual pencil, from the cup on the table, which felt right in a way that a pen wouldn't have, and started marking adjustments. They stood side by side over the plans for the better part of an hour, and he forgot, in the particular absorption of a problem that had clean edges and solvable dimensions, to feel the cold draft from the driveway where Carol's Subaru had disappeared. "Here," he said at one point, tapping a structural junction in the climbing frame. "This load transfer is going to fail under real use. Kids aren't gentle. You need a secondary brace here and here." Victoria leaned over to look, close enough that he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes that came from years of reading and screen work and focused concentration. She traced the junction with her own finger. "If we add the brace, does it change the sight line?" "Depends on the material. If you use the same wood as the primary, no, it reads as part of the structure rather than an addition." "Show me on the elevation." He drew it in. She studied it. "Better," she said. "Yes, that's better." It was late afternoon by the time they'd worked through the worst of the estimate. Diane had left an hour ago. The project office had gone quiet around them, and the light through the windows had flattened into the particular colorless gray of late November at 4 o'clock in New Hampshire. Victoria made tea on a small electric kettle she'd brought from wherever she was staying. He didn't ask, and handed him a cup he accepted without comment, and they sat on either side of the folding table with the plans between them, like a map of something they were both working toward without having fully decided to. "The ramp," Derek said. She looked up. "At the café. Someone damaged it." He'd gotten a call from Paul that morning, the café owner. The ramp had been found partially dismantled when Paul arrived to open at 7. Not destroyed completely. Removed in a specific way, the new hardware he'd installed pulled free at the mounting points and set aside, as if someone wanted the message to be understood. "I know what you built, and I can take it apart." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "When?" "Overnight. Paul didn't see anyone." She was quiet for a moment. "He knows I use it." "He knows you use it." She set down her tea. She looked at the plans on the table. All that careful work, all those measurements and load calculations and sight lines, and she looked at them with an expression Derek recognized because he'd seen it before, the expression of someone deciding how far they were going to let fear narrow the shape of their life before they stopped moving. "I'll call Brooks," she said. "I already did. He's going to pull the street camera footage from overnight, but the angle is probably wrong. The camera on Birchwood faces the intersection, not the side entrance." "So nothing?" "Probably nothing." She pressed her fingertips against the edge of the table. "He did this because you fixed it." "Yes." "He's telling you that anything you do to protect me, he can undo." "That's what he's saying." She was quiet for long enough that Derek started to think she was done talking about it, that she was going to put it away somewhere internal and move forward the way she always seemed to move forward, not by pretending the obstacle didn't exist, but by routing around it with such efficiency that she didn't have to stop. Then she said, "There was a construction site 8 years ago." He waited. "I was working in commercial real estate development, junior partner. We had a project in Manchester, mixed-use building, 16 stories. I went to the site for a walkthrough." She turned her teacup slowly. The temporary platform on the 7th floor, the one the contractors used for exterior work, the safety cables had been improperly secured, didn't meet code by a significant margin. I flagged it. The site supervisor said he'd check into it. She paused. 2 days later, I went back up. The cables were still wrong. I took photos, wrote it up, sent it to the project manager. Derek was still watching her. The day after I sent that report, I was on site again for a meeting. I took the exterior stairs. A section of scaffold gave way. She said this simply, without drama. The way you describe something that happened long enough ago that you finished being surprised by it, but haven't finished carrying it. 23 feet. I landed on a secondary platform. It absorbed most of it. She touched the wheel of her chair briefly. Not all of it. The scaffold, Derek said, was sabotaged. The OSHA investigation found cut anchor points. The project manager at the time, a man named Gerald Forrest, had financial reasons to keep that building on schedule and no patience for safety delays. She looked at Derek directly. He retired 6 months after the investigation was closed. No charges. Insufficient evidence, they said. She almost smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. He's still retired. He plays golf in Scottsdale. The room was very quiet. That's why the playground, Derek said. That's part of it. She looked at the plans again. I could have spent the last 8 years being angry at Gerald Forrest. I did spend some of it that way. It didn't build anything. She picked up her tea. This does. Derek looked at the plans on the table, the carefully drawn structures, the wide paths, the equipment designed to be used and not merely approached, and thought about what it cost to take the thing that had been done to you and turn it into something that other people could walk through, roll through, climb on. I'm going to rebuild the ramp, he said, tomorrow morning. She looked at him. He can pull it apart again if he wants. I'll rebuild it again. He said this not with bravado, but with the flat certainty of someone stating a policy. He doesn't get to decide what stays broken. Victoria looked at him for a long moment with that precise, unhurried attention. Then she said, You're a very stubborn man. I've been told. I mean it as a compliment. I know you do. He rebuilt the ramp the next morning. It took him 90 minutes because he'd done it once already and knew exactly what he was doing. Paul stood in the doorway again with his daily apron and watched, and this time didn't offer any opinions. When Derek was done, Paul brought him a coffee without being asked, and it was still not good coffee, and Derek drank it standing on the ramp. Nothing happened that night, or the night after. The quiet was worse than the messages. At least the messages were information. Tuan, Brooks called on a Tuesday. He filed a complaint, Brooks said, against you. Assault, from the cafe incident. 3 witnesses, he says. All of them apparently saw you attack him without provocation. Derek was at the job site, sitting in his truck eating a sandwich that had been in his bag too long. You're joking. I am not joking. Derek, I need you to understand. I know what happened. The cafe owner knows what happened. There is almost certainly phone footage from at least 2 people in that cafe that shows exactly what happened. But right now I have a formal complaint on my desk, and I have to process it. Process it then. I need you to come in and give a statement, today, if possible. He gave the statement that afternoon, a Wednesday, sitting across from Brooks in a beige interview room that smelled like old coffee, which seemed appropriate. He told it plainly, chronologically, without editorializing. Brooks wrote it down and didn't ask leading questions, which Derek appreciated. 3 witnesses, Derek said when he was done. His brother-in-law, a friend, and a woman who I believe is his neighbor. None of them were in the cafe on Saturday. So they weren't witnesses. They were witnesses to Logan's version of events, as told to them later. Brooks set down his pen. He's building a record, Derek. A paper trail. Positioning himself as the victim. The complaint probably won't go anywhere. The cafe footage alone should kill it. But that's not the point of it. The point is that now I have a complaint on file. The point is that now, if something happens, there's a document that establishes a narrative where you're the aggressor. Brooks looked at him steadily across the table. He's thought about this. For 9 years, Derek said. Tell me about Halcyon. I can't. Derek, classified. I mean it, Ethan. There's nothing I can tell you that wouldn't require clearances you don't have, and telling you without them just creates a different problem. He leaned forward. What I can tell you is that Logan Mercer's brother died on an operation I was part of, and Logan believes it was my fault, and he's been planning what to do about that for a very long time. Brooks exhaled slowly. Is he right? Was it your fault? Derek was quiet for a moment. It was my call, he said. I made it in about 4 seconds with incomplete information in a situation where every available option had a body count. Carter Mercer was in the wrong position because of a choice he made. My call cost him his life. Whether that's fault is... He stopped. That's a question I'll be working on for the rest of my life. Logan Mercer has already decided the answer. Brooks looked at him with the expression of a man who had heard a lot of hard things in beige rooms and knew when a person was telling the truth. All right, he said quietly. All right. Derek drove back to the empty house in Garnet and called Lily, who told him that Carol's guest bed was actually slightly less terrible with the foam topper, and that she'd gotten a 92 on the history project about the railroad expansion. And he told her that was excellent, and she said it would have been a 95 if the bibliography formatting had been different, and he said that bibliography formatting was the most important part of any historical analysis. And she called him a liar in a tone of voice that meant she was okay. She was doing okay. And he held on to that the way he held on to things he needed to keep. He was heating up soup when the text came. Not a burner this time. Logan's actual number, the same one that had been in the police file, the one connected to a real account with a real name, which was either carelessness or deliberate, and with Logan Mercer, deliberate felt more likely. Millfield Road, warehouse at the end. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Come alone. If you bring anyone, police, friends, anyone, Victoria pays for it. I have people watching her building right now. One phone call from me and they go in. Come alone and we end this between us. The way it should have ended 9 years ago. Don't make me hurt someone who has nothing to do with this. Derek read it 3 times. He sat at the kitchen table with the soup going cold on the stove and his phone in his hands and the particular silence of a house where his daughter wasn't. And he thought about the word alone and what it cost, and what the alternative cost, and whether there was a version of this that didn't require him to walk into a trap with both eyes open. He couldn't find one. He called Brooks. Don't, Brooks said immediately. Derek, don't go. He has people at Victoria's building. We don't know that. Can you guarantee he doesn't? Silence on the line. No, Brooks admitted. I can't guarantee that. Then I go. Derek, listen to me. Ethan. His voice was quiet. I'm not asking for permission. I'm calling you because you need to know and because I need you to do something about Victoria tonight. Get someone to her building, not a patrol drive-by, someone on the door. And what about you? I'm going to be fine. You don't know that. No, he agreed. I don't. He hung up and sat in the kitchen for a while longer. The soup had gone completely cold. He poured it back into the pot and turned the burner back on and stood over it while it reheated and thought about Carter Mercer. Not the moment of the call, not the 4 seconds and the incomplete information, but before that. Carter in his gear, Carter with the particular energy of a man who was good at the work and knew it. He'd been 26. He had a sister who sent him cookies. He'd talked about a woman he was seeing back in Virginia. Derek thought about the letter. He'd never opened it. He wasn't sure he'd been right about that. He wasn't sure he'd been wrong. Carter had left it addressed to him, sealed, formal, given to the chaplain to be held. And when it had come to Derek 3 weeks after Halcyon, he'd held it for a long time and then put it in a box and put the box in a place he didn't go to often. He still had it. He knew where it was. He ate the soup. He washed the bowl. He went upstairs and found the box in the back of the closet shelf and took out the envelope and held it. The paper had gone slightly soft over the years from the humidity of various places it had been stored. Carter Mercer's handwriting on the front was careful and angular, the handwriting of someone who wrote slowly because they wanted the words to land right. Callahan, it said. Just the name. No rank. Derek turned it in his hands once and put it back in the box. Not yet. That wasn't the right moment, and he'd know the right moment, or he wouldn't, and either way he wasn't going to open a dead man's last words to him while standing alone in his daughter's empty house the night before he walked into whatever Logan Mercer had spent 9 years building. He went back downstairs and called Brooks again. I have a condition, Derek said. You're not in a position... Listen, I go tomorrow. I go alone, or appear to go alone. But I need you to do something for me before I walk through that door. Brooks was quiet. Derek could almost hear him making the calculation, the cop's calculation of risk and protocol, and the thing he'd do differently if it were up to him, and what it actually came down to when a man he respected said, "This is how it has to be." "Talk," Brooks said. Derek talked. He laid it out. Not everything, not the parts that were still classified, but the shape of what he thought Logan had planned, the way he'd been constructing this, the pressure points. He laid it out the way he used to lay out operational planning in a different life, clearly and in sequence, accounting for the variables he could account for. When he was done, Brooks was quiet for a long moment. "That's a significant ask," he said. "I know. If it goes sideways—" "I know, Ethan." Another silence. Then, "You'd better be right about what he's going to do." "I've been right about him before," Derek said. "That's the problem. He slept better that night than he had in 2 weeks, which he'd learned a long time ago was a thing that happened before the hard days. Not because the fear was gone, but because the decision was made, and the not knowing had ended, and his body understood that it was time to stop spending energy on the question and start storing it for whatever came after. In the morning, he drove to Millfield Road in the daylight and looked at the warehouse from the end of the block. It was an old distribution facility, 2 stories, no windows on the ground level, loading bays on the east side. 3 entry points that he could see. Probably a 4th on the north face he couldn't see from the road. He drove past twice. He didn't stop. He went back to Garnett and ate breakfast and repaired a section of fence in the backyard that had been loose since September, and when that was done, he sat on the back steps in the cold and called Lily. "You sound weird again," she said. "I've got a thing tonight, work thing. Might be late." "What kind of work thing happens at night?" "An irregular kind." She was quiet. "Dad, are you—" "I'm going to be fine," he said. "I promise you that." She was quiet a little longer. "You can't promise that," she said. "You don't know." He thought about arguing. He didn't. "No," he said. "I can't promise it, but I've done hard things before and come out of them, and I'm going into this one with my eyes open. That's the most honest thing I can tell you." The line was quiet. He listened to her breathe for a moment, his 12-year-old daughter who was too smart for reassurances and too young to be without them. "Call me when it's over," she finally said. "It doesn't matter what time. Call me." "I'll call you," he said. "Go do your homework." "I already did my homework." "Then go do something fun." "Fun," she repeated in the tone of someone who found the concept temporarily inaccessible. "Lily." "I know," she said. "I know, Dad." She paused. "Come back, okay?" "I will," he said. He sat on the back steps a while longer after they hung up, and the yard was cold and still, and the tree line at the far edge sat against a gray November sky. And somewhere between the fence he'd just fixed and the sky and the quiet house behind him, Derek Callahan let himself understand, fully, what tonight was going to cost, and what it was going to require, and what he was going to have to reach back into himself to find. He hadn't wanted to be that person anymore. He'd built something else instead, a house, a craft, a daughter who burned her toast and brought both pillows to her aunt's house and asked him to call every day. But the thing about what he used to be was that he'd never fully stopped being it. He'd just stopped choosing it. Tonight he was going to choose it, deliberately, one last time. He went inside and ate an early dinner and washed the dish and checked the locks and turned off the lights one by one, moving through the house in the early dark, and at 8:15 he put on his jacket and picked up his keys. He drove toward Millfield Road through a town that was going about its quiet evening business. Lights in windows, a couple walking a dog, the diner on 4th Street with its neon sign humming in the cold. His hands were steady on the wheel. The warehouse on Millfield Road was the kind of building that had stopped pretending to be useful sometime around 2011. Derek pulled off the road 2 blocks short of it, killed the headlights, and sat in the dark for 90 seconds. Old habit. Let the eyes adjust, let the street tell you what it knows before you move through it. The neighborhood was light industrial. A plumbing supply company closed for the night, a fenced lot with construction equipment, a stretch of chain link running the length of the block with a dead streetlight at the far end that created a pocket of dark that he noted and filed. The warehouse itself sat at the end of the road like the period at the end of a sentence. 2 stories, loading bays on the east side as he'd seen that morning, no lights visible from the front. But there was a vehicle parked on the north side. He could see the edge of it from where he sat, the front quarter panel of a dark SUV catching a sliver of light from somewhere behind the building. One vehicle visible, probably not the only one. He got out of the truck quietly and stood on the road for a moment. The cold was sharp and still, the kind of cold that carried sound clearly, and he listened to the block, distant traffic from the main road, the tick of his engine cooling, nothing else. No voices, no movement. He'd left his phone with a recorded voice message to Brooks, time-stamped, laying out everything he'd told him on the call 2 nights ago. Belt and suspenders. If this went completely wrong, at least the record would exist. He checked his watch. 8:54. He walked the last 2 blocks on the sidewalk, not trying to be invisible. Logan was expecting him, and arriving like a ghost would change the temperature of whatever waited inside before he had a chance to read it. He wanted to walk through that door as Derek Callahan, carpenter, single father, man who'd driven here because there was no other option, not as what he'd been trained to be. He'd be what he needed to be when the moment required it. The side entrance, a personnel door beside the second loading bay, was unlocked. The handle turned when he tried it, which told him Logan had expected him to find this door, which meant Logan had watched him scout the building this morning, which meant the SUV on the north side wasn't the only set of eyes he'd had on the place. Derek pushed the door open and went in. The interior was large and cold and smelled of old concrete and something chemical underneath, whatever had been stored here last, years ago. Emergency lighting ran along the base of the walls, the kind that stayed on regardless of whether the main power was connected, casting the floor in a dim amber that turned shadows into something solid. The ceiling was 30 feet up, crossed with steel beams that disappeared into darkness. The space was mostly empty except for debris, old shelving units, a forklift that hadn't moved in a decade, pallets stacked in groups along the south wall. 3 men. He clocked them in his first 4 seconds inside. One near the south wall, standing, trying to look casual and not managing it. Another on the mezzanine level, the steel walkway that ran along the east wall about 15 feet up, positioned where he could see the whole floor. The third was near the center of the room, and Derek needed a moment to recognize him because of what was different. Logan Mercer looked smaller than he had in the cafe. That wasn't right. He was the same size, the same physical presence. But something in the cafe had been performance, Derek realized now, the aggressive posture of a man keeping himself wound up. What was standing in the center of this cold warehouse was what was left after the performance ran out. He wore a heavy jacket, and his hands were at his sides, and he looked at Derek with the eyes of someone who had arrived somewhere they'd been traveling toward for a very long time, and found that the arriving was not what they'd imagined. He looked tired. Not weak. Tired. The kind of tired that goes all the way down. "You came alone," Logan said. "I came alone," Derek said. It wasn't entirely true, but it was true enough for the moment. He walked forward slowly, keeping the man on the south wall in his peripheral vision and tracking the figure on the mezzanine without looking directly at him, a skill that was muscle memory now, that he didn't have to think about any more than he had to think about breathing. 15 feet from Logan, he stopped. "Where's your people near Victoria's building?" Derek said. "Stand down." Logan said it without looking away from Derek, clearly to someone else, and Derek heard the faint sound of a phone notification from the direction of the south wall. A message going out, he assumed, to whoever had been watching Victoria's building. He'd have to trust that Brooks had gotten there first. He didn't have another option. "Is she okay?" Derek said. "She's fine. I told you. I don't want her. I want you." "Then let's talk." Logan's jaw worked. "Talk," he said. The word tasted wrong in his mouth, like he'd been planning this for 9 years, and talk was not what he'd been planning. "You want to talk. You sent me a text that said we'd end this. I'm here. So tell me what ending it looks like to you. You know what it looks like." "I want to hear you say it." Something moved through Logan's face, something complicated, something that had more layers to it than the flat rage Derek had seen in the cafe. Up close, in the amber half-dark, Logan Mercer was a man who was not simply angry. He was a man who was suffering, and who had organized his suffering around a single fixed point for so long that the suffering and the point had become the same thing. Carter was 26 years old, Logan said. His voice was low and even, which was worse somehow than shouting would have been. You want to know what 26 looks like when you're the older brother? It looks like a kid. Still a kid, even in the uniform, even with all the training. He called me the week before, said he was good, said the team was solid. He stopped. Said he trusted his team leader. Derek held that. You made a call, Logan continued. 4 seconds, the report said. 4 seconds and my brother was dead. He took one step forward. Do you even remember his name? Without thinking about it, do you remember it? Carter James Mercer, Derek said. Born March 14th, grew up in Raleigh, liked baseball and hated paperwork, and was genuinely the best shot on the team with a rifle at 400 yards. He said it flatly, not for effect. I remember everything about him. Logan's breath went out of him slightly, like something had been braced for impact and instead got something else. Then you know, Logan said, quieter now. You know what the call cost. Yes, Derek said. I know. Then why? Logan's voice cracked slightly at the edges, the first crack Derek had seen in it. Why are you still standing here and he's not? And there it was. The thing underneath everything. Not strategy, not architecture, not 9 years of careful planning. Just that question, the oldest and worst question, the one that didn't have an answer that made anything better. Because I made the call and I was the one who walked out, Derek said. That's it. There's no better answer than that. I made the call with what I had, in the time I had, and Carter was in the wrong position because of a decision he made 30 seconds before I made mine, and people died and I didn't, and I have thought about that every day for 9 years. Not every week, every day. Logan looked at him. I'm not going to tell you I'm sorry in a way that asks you to forgive me, Derek said. I don't get to ask that. What I'll tell you is that I know what it cost, and I know that knowing doesn't help you. The warehouse was very quiet. Then Logan said, I'm dying. Derek had half expected it. The text, the timing, the particular quality of a man who had decided he had nothing left to lose, but hearing it stated plainly still landed. How long? Derek said. Months, maybe less. Logan's voice had gone flat again, not with anger, but with the flatness of a man who had processed the information and come out the other side into something past processing. Pancreatic. Fast kind. He almost smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. I found out 4 months ago. I figured if I was going to do this, now or never. Something like that. He looked at Derek with something that was beyond tired, something that was almost relief. The relief of a man who has been carrying a very heavy thing and is starting to understand he can't carry it much further. He stopped, started again. I needed someone to pay for it. I needed there to be a cost. You understand? I needed the math to balance somewhere. I understand that, Derek said. And the thing was, he did. He understood it in the specific way of someone who had stood on the other side of the same equation, who had spent years asking what the cost of his own survival should be, what you owed to the people who didn't make it out, whether the fact of being alive in their absence was itself a debt that couldn't be cleared. There's something, Derek said carefully, that I've been holding for 9 years. Something that belongs to you more than it belongs to me. Logan frowned. Carter left a letter, sealed, addressed to me. I don't know why he addressed it to me. Maybe he didn't have time to... Derek stopped. I never opened it. I want you to have it. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. It had a different texture, a different weight. Why didn't you open it? Logan asked. Because I wasn't sure I had the right to, Derek said, and because I was afraid of what it might say. Both of those things. Logan stared at him. Something in his face was doing something complicated that he didn't seem fully in control of, and that was when the shooting started. It came from the mezzanine, not aimed at Derek, which told him immediately that whoever was up there had not been given clear instructions or had decided to improvise, because the first shot went wide and took out an emergency light panel on the south wall, plunging that corner into darkness. The man near the south wall was moving, and Derek was already moving too, laterally and low, the way his body remembered before his mind caught up. The second shot was closer. Derek registered 3 things in rapid sequence. Logan Mercer dropping to one knee and pulling a weapon he hadn't been holding a second ago. The sound of the personnel door coming open behind him, fast and hard, and the muzzle flash from the mezzanine, which told him the shooter up there was not a professional because professionals didn't let you see their muzzle flash before they had a target. "Police, don't move! Nobody move!" Brooks. And behind Brooks, 3 officers coming through the loading bay door on the east side simultaneously, which was the other entry point Derek had flagged in their conversation, the one that could be breached quietly if someone went around the back of the building first and got the bay door open, which Brooks had had 2 days to arrange. The man on the south wall put his hands up immediately. People who put their hands up immediately in a situation like this were people who had not fully committed to being there and were looking for an exit. Derek noted that and moved on. The figure on the mezzanine was the problem. He was moving along the walkway toward the far stairs, and he still had the weapon, and he was making the particular series of bad decisions that people make when they're scared and armed and cornered. Derek was already at the base of the mezzanine stairs. He'd covered the distance during the chaos of the entry, using the darkness where the light panel had been shot out. And when the man came down the stairs, he came down fast and found Derek at the bottom. It lasted about 4 seconds. The man was bigger than Logan, younger, and had no idea what he was walking into. Derek took the weapon out of the equation first. A controlled joint manipulation that didn't require much force, and ended with the gun on the floor and the man's wrist at an angle that made any further reaching inadvisable. And then it was just a matter of leverage and positioning and making clear, without anyone getting badly hurt, that the math of the situation had changed. "Down," Derek said. "On the floor, hands out." The man went down. Derek straightened up and turned around. Logan was on his knees in the center of the warehouse floor with 2 officers behind him and his weapon in the evidence bag already, and he was looking at Derek with an expression that was not quite any single thing, not anger, not defeat, not betrayal. Something more complicated than all of those. Something that looked almost like a man finally stopping to breathe after a very long run. Brooks was beside Derek. "The building on Victoria Street," Derek said, low and quick. "We had 2 officers on the door from 8 p.m., Brooks said. "She's fine." He let out a breath he'd been holding since he walked through that door. Brooks put a hand on his shoulder, briefly, the way men who don't typically do that kind of thing do it when it matters. "You're bleeding," he said. Derek looked down. There was a tear in his jacket at the left shoulder, and underneath it a graze, not deep, not serious, but there, stinging now that he noticed it. The first shot from the mezzanine had been closer than wide. "It's nothing," he said. "It's not nothing, but we'll deal with it." Brooks looked at him steadily. "You did good tonight." "We did good tonight," Derek said. "You had to actually show up." "First time for everything," Brooks said, which was as close as he got to a joke in an active scene. They brought Logan out through the loading bay door, and as the officers moved him past Derek, Logan stopped. Not resisting, just stopping, the officers allowing it because it was clear he wasn't going anywhere. He looked at Derek. "The letter," he said. "You were serious." "I was serious." Logan's jaw moved. His eyes were red-rimmed and dry, the eyes of a man who had used up whatever he had available for this kind of moment. "Why would you give that to me?" "Because it's not mine," Derek said. "It was never mine." One of the officers moved them along, and Logan walked out into the cold night air, and Derek stood in the loading bay and watched the door close behind them. He sat down on a concrete step and pressed his hand against the graze on his shoulder, which had started to make itself known with more insistence. Around him, the warehouse was filling with the procedural sounds of a crime scene establishing itself. Voices, radios, the crunch of boots on the gritty floor, evidence tags going on the weapons, someone photographing the mezzanine. He looked at his hand. There was some blood, but not much. A paramedic found him 10 minutes later, a young woman with a matter-of-fact efficiency he appreciated because he didn't have the energy for anything else. She cleaned the graze and dressed it while he sat on the step and answered her questions about pain level and prior injuries with the condensed truthfulness of someone who didn't want to be there long. "You should get this checked properly," she said. "I will. Tonight, ideally. Maybe tomorrow." She gave him a look that communicated professional skepticism, but didn't push it, which was the correct call. Brooks came back in at 10:30 and crouched beside the step, which was undignified for a man of his build, but he did it anyway. Both accomplices in custody. The one on the south wall is talking already. Logan's being processed. He paused. He's not fighting anything. He told the arresting officer he was done fighting. Derek nodded. The terminal diagnosis is going to be a factor in how this moves through the system, Brooks said carefully. I'm not saying it excuses anything, but the DA's office is going to have to navigate that. I know. Derek. Brooks looked at him with the particular directness of someone who had been thinking about how to say something for a while. You had a letter from his brother. You didn't tell me that. No. Why? Derek was quiet for a moment. Because it was the only thing I had left to offer him that meant anything, and I couldn't offer it to him through an intermediary. He looked at the floor. Some things have to be done directly. Brooks studied him. He didn't seem entirely satisfied with that answer, but he seemed to recognize that it was the only one available and that pushing on it wouldn't produce a better one. He'll receive personal effects in custody, he said. If you want to send the letter through proper channels, I'll handle it. Derek, I'll handle it properly, Ethan. I promise. Brooks stood up with the effortfulness of a man whose knees were not what they'd been. Get the shoulder looked at tonight. I'm not asking. He left. Derek sat on the step a while longer. The warehouse was quieter now. The main team had moved to the exterior processing the vehicles, and the interior was down to one officer doing a final walkthrough and a crime scene tech finishing up near the mezzanine stairs. The amber emergency lights were still running along the base of the walls, one panel gone where the shot had taken it out. The darkness in that corner now permanent until someone replaced the unit. He thought about Carter Mercer writing a letter. He thought about what a 26-year-old writes in a letter he knows will only be read if he doesn't come back. The particular knowledge that lives in soldiers about possibility and its limits. The way you try to compress the important things into a language that will still mean something in a future you might not be part of. He thought about what it had cost Logan to make this plan and execute it and arrive here tonight and find that it didn't balance the equation the way he'd needed it to. The worst kind of discovery, that the thing you built your remaining life around doesn't do what you needed it to do. That revenge, when you finally get to the edge of it, looks out over the same landscape as grief. He pulled out his phone. It was 10:47. He'd told Lily to go to sleep, that it might be late, that he'd call in the morning. He called her anyway. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping. Dad, I'm okay, he said. It's over. He heard her exhale. It was a small sound, quick, the sound of something released that had been held very tightly. You said you'd call in the morning. I know. I wanted you to know tonight. She was quiet for a moment. Are you actually okay? Not, I know you'll say you're okay. Are you actually? He looked at the bandage on his shoulder. He thought about the warehouse, and the 4 seconds, and the 9 years, and the letter in a box in his closet, and the man being processed tonight who was dying and would probably die before any sentence was fully served and still had to face what tonight had not resolved. I'm mostly okay, he said. That's the honest answer. Mostly is good enough, she said quietly. Mostly is better than the alternative. When did you get so pragmatic? I learned it from someone. He almost smiled. The same involuntary brief expression that had been surprising him since a woman in a gray blazer had told him the coffee was not very good. Go to sleep, he said. You can come home in a few days. A few days? I need to sort some things out first. Then home. She didn't push it. She said goodnight in a voice that had settled into something like relief. And he said goodnight, and the line went quiet. He sat on the step a while longer. Then he got up, carefully, because the shoulder had started to stiffen in the cold, and walked across the warehouse floor, past the spot where Logan had stood, past the base of the mezzanine stairs, and out through the loading bay into the night. The cold hit him immediately, clean and honest and without any particular judgment about what he'd done or what it had cost. He stood outside the building and breathed it in. His truck was 2 blocks east. He walked to it on the same sidewalk he'd come in on, at the same pace, though the town looked different now in the way that places look different after something significant has happened in them. Not changed exactly, but recontextualized, like a word whose meaning shifts depending on what comes after it. He got in the truck and sat for a moment before starting it. He thought about what Brooks had said. personal effects in custody. The letter could go through proper channels. Certified mail, chain of custody, all of it documented and clean. He thought about Logan's face when he'd mentioned it. You were serious. He was serious. The letter had been sitting in his closet for 9 years, waiting for someone to figure out who it really belonged to. And he'd figured it out tonight in a cold warehouse with emergency lights on the floor and 2 men who'd been moving toward each other for nearly a decade, finally stopping. He started the truck and drove out of Millhaven the back way, through the neighborhoods that were dark and quiet, and going about the business of an ordinary night. And he thought about the playground plans on the folding table on Clement Street, and the pencil marks he'd made on the elevation drawing, and the secondary brace that would make the whole structure hold the way it was supposed to hold. He thought about a ramp that could be rebuilt as many times as it needed to be rebuilt. He drove through the dark with the heat on low and his hand steady on the wheel, and somewhere between Millhaven and Garnet, the shaking that always came afterward came, and he let it come, and he drove through it, and it passed the way it always passed. He got home at 11:30. The house was quiet and dark and exactly as he'd left it. He checked the locks, front door, back door, the window latch he'd fixed in Lily's room, and then he went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and drank a glass of water in the way you drink water after something long and dehydrating, slowly, all of it. He went upstairs. He got the box from the closet shelf. He took out the envelope and held it under the bedside lamp. Callahan, Carter's careful, angular handwriting. He set the envelope on the nightstand and looked at it for a while. He was not going to open it tonight. That was still Carter Mercer's brother's to open, and Derek was going to get it to him through whatever channel was available. That hadn't changed. But he let himself look at the handwriting. He let himself acknowledge, sitting in the quiet of his own room, that the letter existed and that it had been written by a person who had trusted him enough to address it to him. And that trust, whether it was the trust of someone leaving forgiveness or the trust of someone leaving something harder, was the part of the weight that Derek Callahan would carry without putting down. He put the envelope back in the box. He changed out of his jacket. The shoulder was tender, but the bandage was holding, and he sat on the edge of his bed in the quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly. He could hear it moving through the trees at the property line, that particular sound of late November in New England, the sound of things past their turning point, headed somewhere colder before they could come back around. He lay back on the bed without pulling back the covers, and stared at the ceiling, and let the house be around him, and somewhere between that ceiling and the sound of the wind in the trees, and the thought of Lily sleeping 2 states north with her own pillow, and the foam topper, and the history project that had earned a 92, he closed his eyes. He didn't sleep immediately, but the not sleeping was different than it had been for 2 weeks. Not alert, not tracking sounds, not waiting for the next message or photograph or piece of architecture Logan Mercer had constructed. Just quiet. Just the house and the wind and the particular exhaustion of a man who has done a hard thing and is on the other side of it and doesn't yet know what the other side looks like in the daylight, but knows, for the first time in a long time, that he's going to get to find out. The morning after the warehouse, Derek slept until 7:40. He didn't remember falling asleep. He remembered the ceiling and the wind in the trees and the particular exhaustion of a man on the other side of something. And then there was nothing, and then there was gray morning light coming through the curtains. He'd never bothered to replace. After Sarah died because she'd picked them, and he hadn't wanted to move them. And then enough years had passed that it stopped being about not wanting to move them and became just the curtains. He lay there for a moment, taking inventory the way you do when you've been through something physical, shoulder tender but manageable, the rest of him stiff from the concrete step and the cold in the drive home. He'd slept in his clothes, his boots were still on. He sat up slowly, took the bandage off the shoulder, looked at the grays in the bathroom mirror. It was ugly but shallow, already closing. He'd had worse from job sites. He cleaned it again, put on a fresh dressing from the first aid kit under the sink, and stood in the bathroom for a moment looking at his own face. He looked like what he was, a man who'd had a hard month and was not 25 anymore and hadn't slept enough for weeks. His eyes were okay, though. That was the thing he checked, without admitting he was checking it, whether his eyes looked like the eyes of a man who was all right. They did. Tired, but all right. He made coffee and called Brooks at 8:15. "How's the shoulder?" Brooks said instead of hello. "Fine. What happened overnight?" "Logan Mercer was processed and arraigned this morning. DA's office is moving on it. Weapons charges, criminal threatening, conspiracy. His two people are both cooperating, which helps." Brooks paused. His attorney disclosed the terminal diagnosis to the court this morning. It's going to complicate the sentencing conversation. "I know." "He's not contesting anything, Derek. His attorney told mine that he's instructed them not to mount a defense on the primary charges." A pause. "He just wants it done." Derek stood at the kitchen window with his coffee. The yard was white with first frost, every blade of grass outlined in it, the tree line at the back edge furred and still. It looked clean. "The letter," he said. "I want to send it through proper channels. His attorney can receive it. I'll get you the contact information. Tell them it's from Carter, that it should go directly to Logan, not through anyone else." "I'll tell them." Brooks was quiet for a moment. "Derek, you doing all right?" "I think so." "That's not the same as yes." "No," Derek agreed. "It's not." He went to the job site on Roper Street at 9. The deck extension needed 2 more days of work to be finished, and the family, a couple in their 40s with 3 kids, had been patient through delays that weren't Derek's fault, and one that was, and he owed them the end of it. He worked through the morning in the cold, with his shoulder complaining in a low-grade, persistent way that he managed by adjusting how he held the drill. It was good work, simple work. Wood and measurement and the clean logic of a thing that either fit or didn't, held or didn't, would outlast the effort it took to build it, or wouldn't. He'd chosen this for a reason 6 years ago, and that reason was still true. At noon, he sat on the unfinished deck and ate a sandwich and looked at what he'd built and thought that it was solid. Not beautiful, not exceptional, just solid. A deck that would hold a family's weight for 20 years if they maintained it. A thing that would exist in the world after he'd stopped thinking about it. That was enough. That had always been enough. He called Lily at 12:30. "You slept late," she said. She'd apparently texted at 8, and when he hadn't responded until almost 9, had drawn her own conclusions. "I did." Was it the good kind of sleep or the collapsed kind? Somewhere in the middle. "How's your shoulder?" He told her about the graze in the morning call, keeping it minimal but keeping it honest, because she'd have found out eventually, and finding out from him was always better than finding out around him. She'd been quiet for a moment and then asked 3 precise questions about severity, treatment, and whether he needed anything, in that order, with the focused efficiency of someone who dealt with worry by converting it into logistics. "Better," he said. "I'm back on the job site." "You shouldn't be lifting things." "I'm not lifting heavy things." "Dad." "Lily, I'm fine. The work helps." She made a sound that communicated partial acceptance. "When can I come home?" "Few more days. I want the legal stuff a little further along first, just to be sure the loose ends are actually tied." He turned his coffee thermos in his hand. "You're not miserable at Carol's? The bed is better. The food is good. Carol is Carol." A pause. "I miss the house." "I know. I miss you being annoying in the mornings." "I'm annoying?" "You make coffee at 6 a.m. and you don't use the quiet setting on the grinder." "The quiet setting takes twice as long." "I'm aware. You've explained this. I still think it's inconsiderate." He almost laughed. Something in his chest that had been compressed for weeks expanded slightly, just a degree. 4 more days, he said. "Friday. I'll drive up and get you." "Okay," she said, and then in a different register, quieter, more direct. "Dad, is it actually over? Like, actually?" He thought about Logan in the center of the warehouse. He thought about, "I'm dying, and you were serious," and the way a man's face looks when he has been traveling toward something for 9 years and finally arrives and discovers the landscape is not what he thought. "It's actually over," he said. "Yes." A silence. Then, "Good." Just that. Good. The word of someone who had been carrying a weight and was putting it down. "Okay. Friday, then." He finished the deck on Thursday. The family came out to look at it when he was packing up. And the husband shook his hand with both of his, and the wife said it was exactly what they'd hoped for. And Derek thanked them and meant it, because there was something uncomplicated and sustaining about a person telling you that the thing you built was the thing they needed. He drove to Clement Street. See, Victoria was at the folding tables when he came in, but she wasn't alone this time. There were two people with her, a man in his 30s with the rolled-up sleeves energy of an architect, and a woman who turned out to be the new fabrication contact Victoria had been working with since the original supplier pulled out. They were deep in a conversation about timber grades that Derek interrupted by coming through the door, and all three of them looked up. "The carpenter," Victoria said. "Still not my name." "I know your name." She said it in a tone that was almost fond and not quite, the tone of someone who had decided not to examine the distinction too carefully. "Derek, this is Marcus Webb. He's our structural engineer on the playground project, and Joanne Park from Northwood Fabrication." He shook hands with both of them. Marcus immediately started asking him questions about the wood framing specifications he'd marked on the plans, the kind of questions that were specific and technical and indicated someone who'd actually looked at the drawings rather than glancing at them. Derek answered them directly, and then they were standing together over the plans, and the fabrication conversation pulled Joanne in, and 40 minutes passed in the practical way that good work talk passes. Eventually, Marcus and Joanne packed up and left, and the project office went quiet with the particular quality of quiet that follows people leaving a space they'd filled. Victoria made tea. 2 cups, without asking. She brought them to the table and sat across from Derek, who had stayed because leaving hadn't quite become the obvious next thing. "The equipment supplier confirmed this morning," she said. "Full contract. The fabrication timeline gives us a spring groundbreaking, which means the playground opens by summer." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "It's actually happening." "It was always going to happen," Derek said. "You were always going to make it happen." She looked at him. "You sound very certain of that." "I watched you spend a month getting threatened and harassed and having things you'd built deliberately dismantled, and you kept showing up." He shrugged, which made his shoulder object mildly. "That's not a person who doesn't get things done." She was quiet for a moment. "How are you?" "Better?" "That's not what I asked either." He looked at her. She had the same directness she always had, that refusal to accept the surface answer when she was asking about the thing underneath, and he'd stopped finding it uncomfortable somewhere around the second week of bad coffee and ramp repairs. "I sent the letter yesterday," he said. "Carter's letter, to Logan's attorney." Her expression shifted. "How did that feel?" "Strange, like putting something down that I'd been carrying long enough that I forgot I was carrying it." He turned his cup. "I don't know what's in it. I'll never know. That bothers me less than I thought it would." "Why less?" He thought about it honestly. "Because I think the carrying was the point. Not knowing what it said, just keeping it. Keeping Carter somewhere real, in a box on a shelf where he wasn't just a file and a report and a 4-second decision. The letter was the proof that he was a person." He stopped. "Logan needed that more than I did." Victoria looked at him for a long time. It was not the calculating attention he'd first noticed in her, not the assessment, the precision, the filing of information. It was something else, simpler and less comfortable to receive. "You're a more complicated person than you present," she said. "Most people are. Some people work very hard not to be." She picked up her tea. "You work very hard to seem uncomplicated. Easier that way. For you or for other people." He didn't have a quick answer for that, which was, he suspected, her point. The light through the windows of the project office had gone to the same colorless gray he'd noticed before, late afternoon in November, the day running out of color before it ran out of hours. He thought about the job site, the finished deck, the family who had gotten what they needed. He thought about a box on a closet shelf, lighter now by 1 envelope. "I'd like to build the playground," he said. Victoria looked at him. "The wooden elements, the framing, the climbing structures, the benches. Northwood can handle the metal components and the surfacing, but the wood, I'd like to do it myself." He held her gaze. "I'm a good carpenter. The work is right for what I can do. And I want to build something that stays." She studied him with those dark eyes that saw further into things than they let on. That's a significant commitment. It'll run into spring, probably early summer. I know. You have other jobs. I'll manage the schedule. Derek. She set down her cup. Why? He thought about how to say it and whether to say it exactly, and decided that they'd passed the point where not saying it exactly served either of them. Because you built this out of something that was done to you, he said. And I'd like to be part of what gets built. Not because I owe you something. I don't think I owe you something. Because some things are worth being part of. He paused. And because I'm better at showing up for the next thing than I am at talking about the last thing. And I think you understand that. She was quiet for a moment, then, you'll need to coordinate with Marcus on the structural specs. I know. And Joanne on the fabrication timeline, because the metal and wood phases have to sequence correctly. I know how construction works. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, the same way his expressions were usually not quite smiles, but close. All right, she said. Yes, I'd like you to build it. He drove home through Mill Haven in the last of the daylight, and the town looked the way it always looked, small and ordinary, and going about its business, the diner on 4th Street with its neon sign, the hardware store with the hand-lettered sale sign in the window that had been there since August. He'd driven through this town for 4 years, and it had been backdrop, scenery, the thing you pass through on the way to the job and back. He looked at it differently now, though he couldn't have said precisely how. Maybe just that it felt like a place he was in rather than passing through. He drove up to Carol's on Friday morning. Lily was ready when he pulled in, which meant she'd been watching for the truck, which she would deny if asked. She had her 2 pillows under one arm and her bag over the other shoulder and a look on her face that communicated homeward without having to say it. Carol stood on the porch. She and Derek looked at each other over the roof of the truck, the specific look of 2 siblings who have arrived at the end of a hard thing and don't need to talk about it to know where they are. Thank you, he said. She ate all my good cereal, Carol said. I'll replace it. It's the expensive kind. Carol. She also rearranged my spice cabinet, which I did not ask for and which is frankly an improvement, but I want it noted. Lily, from the other side of the truck. The alphabetical system makes more sense. Nobody asked you, Carol said, in the tone of someone who thought it was completely reasonable. Derek put Lily's bag in the back and they drove south through Vermont into New Hampshire with the heat on and the radio on low, and Lily watched the mountains through the passenger window and didn't talk much for the first hour, which was fine. She'd always been someone who needed the re-entry, the adjustment between places, the transition handled quietly. Tell me about the playground, she said, somewhere around the state line. He told her. The plans, the design, the way Victoria had built the whole concept from the ground up rather than retrofitting accessibility as an afterthought. The wooden structures he was going to build, the timeline, the summer opening. He told her about Victoria in the way he told her about work, factually, specifically, and he was aware, without looking at her, that Lily was listening to more than the facts. She let it go until he was done. Then, she sounds like someone worth knowing. She is. Another silence. Is she? Lily started, then stopped. What? Nothing. Never mind. Lily. She looked out the window. Are you happy? Like, not okay, not fine, not managing, actually happy? He drove for a moment. I think I'm getting there. She nodded slowly, still watching the mountains. Mom would think that's good, she said. I know you don't like me saying stuff like that, but I think it's true. He didn't answer right away. It was still hard to hear, not because it hurt in the sharp way it used to, but because it moved through him in a different way now, like weather moving through, something real and passing rather than something that stopped everything. I do not like you saying it, he said, finally. I just don't always know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything with it, she said. That's kind of the point. He looked at her, this 12-year-old person who had his hands in her mother's eyes and her own particular way of cutting to the middle of a thing that he hadn't taught her and didn't know where she'd gotten it. When did you get so smart? He said. I've always been smart. You've been distracted. He shook his head. She was already looking back out the window, letting the moment be what it was without pulling on it, which was something most adults couldn't manage. They got home in the early afternoon. Lily went through this house the way she always went through it after being away, not checking, exactly, just reacquainting herself with the particular light and smell and sound of the specific place that was hers. She put her pillows back on her bed. She reorganized something in her room that apparently needed reorganizing. She came back downstairs and looked in the refrigerator and declared it inadequate, which was fair. "We'll go tomorrow," Derek said. "Some things we need today." "What things?" "Real maple syrup." He went and got the maple syrup. 3 weeks later, Logan Mercer received the letter. Derek didn't know the moment it happened. He found out later, secondhand, through Brooks, who heard it from Logan's attorney, that Logan had been given the envelope on a Wednesday afternoon in a meeting room at the county correctional facility, and that he'd held it for a long time before opening it. That when he finally read it, he'd had to ask for some time alone, which they gave him. That he'd been different after, not better, exactly, in any way that would show up in a report, but different in the specific way of a man who has been carrying a conversation for 9 years and has finally had it. Derek didn't know what Carter had written. He never would. That was as it should be. What he knew was that Logan Mercer, in the weeks that followed, stopped contesting the legal proceedings. His attorney filed for medical accommodation given the terminal diagnosis, and the DA's office agreed to a supervised release arrangement that kept Logan under monitoring while allowing him access to the palliative care he needed. It wasn't nothing, legally speaking, but it was also, in its own way, the system doing the only thing it could with a situation that had more human dimensions than legal ones. Derek learned about the release through Brooks, who told him on a Tuesday morning phone call with the deliberate neutrality of someone waiting to hear how it landed. "How do you feel about that?" Brooks asked. Derek thought about it. "I think a man who's dying and did what he did because he was dying deserves to die somewhere that isn't a cell," he said. "I think that's true even though what he did was wrong." Brooks was quiet for a moment. "You're a more forgiving person than most." "I'm not sure it's forgiveness," Derek said. "I'm not sure I have the standing to forgive him. Carter was his brother, not mine. What I can do is not spend whatever time Logan has left being the reason he suffers more than he already does." He watched the yard through the kitchen window, frost gone now, the ground softening towards something that might eventually be spring. "That's not nobility. It's just, the other thing takes too much out of you. I know what the other thing costs." "Yeah," Brooks said quietly. "I think you do." He never met with Logan again. He didn't need to. Some things close without requiring the ceremony of closure, and he'd learned, at 32, to be suspicious of the idea that peace came in a specific shape you had to find and recognize. Sometimes it came in the shape of a Wednesday afternoon and not thinking about something for the first time in weeks, and realizing afterward that you hadn't thought about it. The groundbreaking for the Millhaven Community Playground happened on a Saturday in late April, which was appropriate without anyone having planned it that way. It was cold still, the way late April in New Hampshire is cold, bright and clear and honest about the fact that winter doesn't fully release its opinion until it's ready. There were people from the town, a few local officials, Diane and Marcus and Joanne, and a handful of volunteers who'd been involved in the planning. There was a photographer from the local paper who took pictures of Victoria beside the project sign, and Victoria answered the reporter's questions with the directness and specificity Derek had come to understand was simply how she engaged with things that mattered to her. Lily was there in her yellow jacket with the embroidered sun on the sleeve. She stood near the edge of the small crowd and watched the proceedings with the self-contained attention of someone who understood that this was more than a groundbreaking for a playground, even if she only partially understood how. Derek stood a little apart from the crowd, the way he always stood a little apart from crowds, and watched Victoria speak and thought about what it had taken to get to this particular Saturday. The 8 years from a scaffold on the 7th floor to this frozen grass, the phone calls to contractors and grant foundations and town councils, the patience required to move institutions that didn't want to move, the decision to make the thing that was done to you into something other people could use. He thought about resilience and what it actually looked like, which was not what movies made it look like. It didn't look like recovered. It looked like going to the meetings and sending the emails and making the second phone call after the first one didn't get returned, and doing all of that while the thing that happened to you was still real, still carried, not erased, but not allowed to be the only true thing. After the official part ended and the crowd broke into smaller conversations, Victoria rolled toward him. She stopped at his side and they looked at the empty lot that would not be empty by summer, the staked outline of the paths, the flags marking where each structure would go, the ground waiting. "You're thinking about something," she said. "I'm usually thinking about something. Something specific." He looked at the staked flags. "I'm thinking about the brace on the climbing frame, the secondary one. Marcus's latest spec has it in a slightly different position than where I'd put it." She looked at him. "You're thinking about a construction detail. It's an important detail." "Derek." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking that this is a good thing," he said. "What you built, what it's going to be." He looked at the ground, at the flags, at the ordinary muddy April grass that was going to become something. "I'm glad I'm going to build part of it." Victoria was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the lot too, her project, her work, the things she'd moved to Millhaven to oversee and had nearly lost to a man who'd wanted to use the people around her as leverage. "I'm glad you're going to build part of it," she said. "For what it's worth." It was worth quite a bit. He didn't say that because some things didn't need to be said immediately, and they had time now. That was the thing he was still getting used to, the time. The sense that there was not a clock running down, not a threat developing behind the quiet, not a reason to hold everything at arm's length because the arm's length was protection. Just time. Just the work ahead, and the ground they were standing on, and the ordinary difficulty of two people figuring out what they were to each other without the pressure of someone trying to use it against them. Lily appeared at his elbow. She looked at Victoria and then at her father with the transparent innocence of someone who had absolutely been paying attention. "The playground design is really good," she said to Victoria. "I looked at the plans. The path gradient meets ADAAG standards all the way through, and the sight lines from the benches cover the whole play area, which is important for supervision." Victoria looked at her with genuine surprise. "You read the plans?" "My dad had them on the kitchen table." Lily shrugged. "I read things that are on the kitchen table." "She reads everything," Derek said. "The secondary brace on the climbing frame," Lily said, "should probably be at the junction point, not 18 inches offset. That's where the load transfer actually happens." Victoria turned slowly to look at Derek. He held up both hands. "She reads everything," he said again. Victoria looked at Lily. "How old are you?" 12. "Do you know what structural engineering is?" "I know what load transfer is. My dad explains things when I ask questions, and I ask a lot of questions." Something in Victoria's face that had been carefully arranged rearranged itself. It was a good expression, something lighter than what she usually allowed in her face, something that had to do with finding the specific version of a thing that matched what you'd hoped for, which happened rarely enough to be worth marking. "I have plans in the office if you want to look at the full drawings," she said to Lily. Lily looked at her father. He nodded. "Yes, please," she said, with the precise courtesy of a 12-year-old who had decided to be impressive. They walked to the project office together, Victoria and Lily slightly ahead, already talking, Lily asking questions in the sequential, systematic way that meant she was genuinely interested, and Victoria answering them with the full specificity she gave to things that deserved it. And Derek walked a few steps behind, in the April cold, with his hands in his pockets and the raw earth of the empty lot to his right. He thought about the man he'd been before Lily, before the carpenter's hands, and the small town, and the corner café with the faded sign. He thought about Carter Mercer's letter, wherever it was now, whatever it said, whatever weight it had lifted or redistributed when Logan finally read it in a meeting room on a Wednesday afternoon. He thought about the ramp he'd built and rebuilt and built again, and the secondary brace that held the structure true, and the difference between fixing the visible thing and fixing the actual problem. He thought about what it cost to choose, deliberately, the kind of person you wanted to be. Not once, not in a single dramatic moment, but repeatedly, in the ordinary days, in the cold and the work and the conversations and the things you built with your hands and left behind you. He wasn't a different person than the one who had walked out of Operation Halcyon. That person was still in there, still in the steadiness under pressure, Still in the 4-second calculations, still in the way he stood slightly apart from crowds and tracked every room he entered. You didn't unbecome what you'd been trained to become. You just decided what else you were going to be alongside it. He was a carpenter who built things that held. He was a father who drove 4 hours on a Friday and got the expensive maple syrup. He was a man who had spent 6 years in a quiet life and found, when the quiet life was threatened, that he was still capable of protecting it. And he was, he thought, standing on the cold April grass outside a project office where his daughter was asking a billionaire engineer questions about load transfer with the focused intensity of someone who intended to understand every answer. He was maybe something in the early stages of becoming, something he didn't have a clean word for yet. Something to do with a woman who built playgrounds out of the thing that had broken her and who had looked at him across a table of bad coffee and seen past the quiet life to the person inside it. Something that was not replacing what had been lost. Nothing replaced what was lost. But something that was its own true thing, arriving in its own time, not asked for and not refused. He pushed open the door of the project office. Inside, Lily was pointing at the elevation drawing, the one with his pencil marks on it, and saying something to Victoria that made Victoria tilt her head in the way that meant she was genuinely reconsidering something. The plans were spread across the folding table. The electric kettle was going. The project coordinator, Diane, was on the phone in the corner, arranging something with the efficiency that was her baseline mode. It was a room full of work being done, and it was warm, and it was ordinary. Derek came in and let the door close behind him. "The brace," he said, coming to stand beside Lily at the table. "She's right about the junction point. I was going to bring it up with Marcus on Monday." Victoria looked at him. "Why didn't you bring it up at the groundbreaking?" "Because a groundbreaking is for the beginning. Details are for after." She studied him with those dark eyes. "Are you always this methodical?" "Mostly," he said. "Ask my daughter." Lily, without looking up from the plans, "He's extremely methodical. It's both a strength and occasionally very annoying." "It's not annoying," Derek said. "It's a little annoying," Lily said. Victoria pressed her lips together against something that was clearly a smile and not entirely succeeding at staying one. "Monday, then," she said. "You and Marcus. Bring the revised spec." "I'll have it ready." The kettle clicked off. Victoria moved to make tea. 2 cups, the same automatic way she'd started doing it without asking, which was not a large thing but was the kind of not large thing that accumulated meaning over time. And Lily kept looking at the plans and asking questions. And outside the windows of the project office, the April afternoon was going about its ordinary business, cold and bright, and full of the particular quality of a season that hasn't arrived yet, but is clearly coming. Derek Callahan stood in the warm room with his daughter and the woman who built things out of broken ground, and looked at the plans for what they were going to build, and understood that this was not a resolution in the clean, final way that people sometimes imagined resolution looked. There was still the shoulder that would ache in cold weather. There was still a man dying in supervised release somewhere, holding a letter from his brother. There was still a box on a shelf in his closet that was lighter by one envelope, but still held 9 years of something that didn't have a name. There was still Lily's mother, in the curtains Derek had never replaced, in the gray-green of Lily's eyes that changed with the light. None of that was going to resolve. None of that was going to become simple or clean or finished. You didn't get finished. You got forward. You got the next true thing. You got the work in front of you and the people beside you and the ordinary accumulation of days that were not the day everything broke, but were the days in which you decided what to do with the breaking. He was 32 years old, and he had built a deck that would last 20 years and was going to build a playground that children would climb on after he'd stopped thinking about it. And his daughter was in the room with him, and she was fine, not unafraid, not unmarked by what had happened this fall, but fine. The particular kind of fine that was not pretending, but was real. And outside the ground was thawing, and the stakes were in, and the summer was coming, and there was work to do. He picked up the pencil from the cup on the folding table. "Here," he said, leaning over the plans. "Let me show you where the brace actually needs to go." And Lily moved to one side to give him room, and Victoria leaned forward to see, and Derek Callahan put the pencil to the paper and drew the line where it needed to be, Clean and sure, the way you draw a line when you know where you are and you know where you're going, and your hands, finally, have stopped shaking.